In class, we took a look at our unit matrix for World War II test. So on this sheet that you've received is a lot of studying that you can do for your unit test. On the side here, it looks at the background of the war and what the causes of the war were. If you look along the very top, this is all the major battles of the war and kind of a timeline and in order of what happened all the way up to the Holocaust, starting at the Phoney War. In the middle, we look at the Battle of the Atlantic and the home front and what's happening on the home front in the war. And then we look at total war, etc. And we look at some of the main personalities involved in the war. So today we filled in some of the blanks for the road to war. We started out by looking at who the Axis powers were, and a good way to remember that is Japan, Italy, and Germany. And there's the world going, ugh, not this again, World War II. So we looked at the background of the war, and we said one of the main reasons that the war started was imperialism, and we looked at three imperial powers. The first was Italy, who was going after Africa, so they were looking at Abyssinia, and they invaded it, and that went rather poorly for Italy, even though they did win. Then we looked at Germany, who had invaded Russia eventually. They invaded Czechoslovakia, and they invaded Poland, and they did the Anschluss with Austria. So they were a very imperialistic, aggressive power. And imperialism, once again, means a country that basically wants to invade another in a very basic sense. Japan also had invaded China. They'd invaded Manchuria. So you've got all these really tough powers. It's kind of like a bunch of teenage boys on adrenaline and full of testosterone that are going around bullying and fighting other people. So the first look at the war, we looked at Hitler testing out his blitzkrieg. So World War II actually had a test case, and that was the Spanish Civil War. What you need to know about the Spanish Civil War is it involved Francisco Franco, who was a totalitarian dictator, very conservative, and on the other side it involved communists, socialists. Canada actually sent something called the Mackenzie Papineau Battalion, which I have abbreviated as the MacPaps here, in what we called international brigades. And these were groups of volunteers from throughout the world who went to fight in Spain against the fascist powers, against Franco as part of the communists, and they eventually actually lost. So let's look at Germany in more detail and their imperialism. The first thing they do is they go for part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, which is full of Germans. Now the world looks at this, and today we look at it as how could he possibly be allowed by Britain and France to take over a country without impunity? But Czechoslovakia had 3 million German citizens living in the Sudetenland, and Hitler had basically said, they're Germans. They want to be part of Germany. And so they said, yeah, Britain and France said, yeah, you can take that. Eventually invades all of Czechoslovakia. And the famous case that we looked at earlier, and we saw video footage of it, was Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, who went to Munich, met with Hitler, and said, I've come up with peace in our time. I've come up with this Munich Agreement. Hitler will no longer invade any other countries. He's given me his word. Of course, we know that's not true, because what happened was Hitler went and invaded Poland on September 3rd, 1939. Basically said, yoink, let's take it. And then we looked at anti-Semitism as this philosophy behind German actions. And anti-Semitism just is a term for racism against Jewish people. It has its very own term. Just like the Holocaust should generally be used simply for the genocide of Jewish people, and they have their own word, the Shoah. So war starts with the invasion of Poland on September 3rd, 1939, but it's not actually much fighting going on. There's something called the Phoney War. And what this is, it's a period where there's no war in Western Europe. Now, it's not true that there's no war. It's kind of a Western Europe-centric view because there was war going on in Finland. So to tell a Finnish person there wasn't war going on would be quite upsetting to them. The next event we had looked at throughout the course of our unit was the miracle at Dunkirk, the evacuation at Dunkirk. France was overrun by Hitler in 6 weeks, a slap in the face really for the French army. So the British say, we've got to get out of here. And they're holed up on a beach called Dunkirk, and there's 340,000 British soldiers, and they actually call back to Mother Britain, who sends everything from warships to personal watercraft, pretty much, to come and grab these soldiers, and they evacuate all of them without losing any lives. The next event we looked at was the Battle of Britain, called Operation Sea Lion. So I've drawn a sea lion here to help you remember it. And that was when Hitler tried to invade Britain by first bombing it into oblivion. He knew he couldn't just land a fighting force in Britain. He would have to take out their planes and everything like that before he could do so. And involved in that was the London Blitz, which was the 53 consecutive night bombing of London that Hitler engaged in. The Battle of Britain, if they'd have lost, the war could have been over, because Hitler basically only stood against one other power, and that was Britain and the Commonwealth. The next battle we looked at very briefly was Pearl Harbor, and the significance to Canada isn't much, except that it eventually brings the United States into the war and helps the Allied war effort, because they've got fresh troops and a lot of money in terms of the United States joining. It also leads to the internment of Japanese people, because Canada looks and says, well, if Japanese did that to the United States, maybe Japanese people living in Canada are spies as well, even though the RCMP and the Army had declared that that's not possible. The first place Canadians actually saw combat was in Hong Kong. It was not a good situation. Soldiers went there to defend it, knowing it was a suicide mission. On Christmas Day, Hong Kong was taken over by the Japanese, and most of the Canadian soldiers were taken prisoner of war or killed. It was awful living conditions for those soldiers. The next campaign was the Italian campaign. The Allies had called it the soft underbelly of Europe. They thought it was a great place to invade, go all the way up through Italy, end up in Germany. But there was heavy fighting, street to street, house to house. It was not the cakewalk that they'd envisioned. The next thing we looked at was D-Day, which stands for day. There's no real meaning to the word D-Day. Canadians took Juno Beach, and it's the beginning of the end for Hitler and the Axis powers on June 6, 1944. This is the full-scale invasion of France. Some of the heaviest fighting on the beaches of Normandy in France was Omaha Beach, which was led by the Americans. And if you watch the movie Saving Private Ryan, they show a great example of what that fighting would have looked like. After D-Day, Canadians don't go straight to Berlin and take on the German forces in the motherland. They're sent to Holland to liberate it. And to this day, the Dutch people absolutely love Canadians for what we did in helping liberate them. So this is the first major look at all the battles. We are going to fill in the inside of this matrix, this whole blank area, relatively soon, and look what's going on, not just on the battlefields of Europe, but what's going on the home front as well.